You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
When you look at the future, you also want to look at the past. If you have previous predictions, where did they go? Why did they go in a different direction? And how does that inform the future in terms of looking at what sort of forecasts we may see 10 years from now? That's going to be our conversation today. Joining us today is John Eichberger. He's the Executive Director of the Transportation Energy Institute, formerly known as the Fuels Institute. Thanks for joining us today, John.
My pleasure, Jeff. Good seeing you again.
So the Transportation Energy Institute just celebrated its birth, I guess, if you will, on the 10 years of the Fuels Institute. And the first research paper that the Fuels Institute put out, you recently took a look at again. Can you talk a little bit about the reasoning behind taking a predictive paper that takes us to now and looking back at it, where you hit the mark and where you didn't hit the mark?
Yeah, so our first paper, we were founded in 2013. Our first paper was Tomorrow's Vehicles, What Will We Drive in 2023? 10-year lookout. What powertrains will we be driving, both light duty, medium, and heavy duty? What are the sales going to be, vehicles in operation? And as we came up on 2023, I thought, now it's kind of like Back to the Future. And actually, we titled the report Back to the Future. It's like Marty going back 10 years or 50 years, whatever it was. And what really happened? What did we think was going to happen and what really happened? And recognizing even then, before we did the paper, that what we predicted in 2013 is not exactly what happened in 2023. And understand why. Understand what did we assume was going to happen when we wrote the paper compared to what really happened, and what from that experience can we learn to guide us as we look at the next 10 years and plan accordingly.
So we have this paper that was developed 10 years ago, and you cite 5 big events that kind of threw some sand in the gears in terms of why we didn't hit where we thought we might be when you're looking at 10 years ago. Do you want to kind of walk through those?
Yeah, I think it's important. First of all, we commissioned it when we were the Fuels Institute. Now we're Transportation Energy Institute. The company that did the forecast for us, which powered our report 10 years ago, was Navigant Research. They're now Guidehouse Insights. So we asked Guidehouse to do this paper for us. And it was funny when I called them, I was, hey, I really want you guys to do this. And I talked to the guy who actually helped write the first paper. He's all, so you want me to come out and tell you why we're wrong? Well, kind of. That's not the real point. But so they looked back and they actually really enjoyed this. They were able to talk to a lot of people and reflect. So we never get to reflect on what's happened. We're always being asked to project what's going on. And they said there are several things. And I always go back to the Don Rumsfeld quote. There's known knowns, there's known unknowns, and there's unknown unknowns. And so they had expectations of what was reasonably likely to occur over the next 10 years when they gave us the forecast in 2013, but they've never gone back and dissected, okay, what changed? The first thing they pointed out was, when we published this in 2013, we had no idea that oil price was going to collapse the next year. And that's really, evident when you look at the forecast. And we started the Institute, natural gas as a light duty transportation fuel and a heavy duty transportation fuel was the rage. My phone was ringing every week. John, should I put a natural gas fueling station? And we even had a natural gas manufacturer on the board when we founded ourselves. And so the forecast in 2013 was we're going to see a huge surge in natural gas vehicles because the price was so competitive and stable, and oil prices were crazy. Oil price collapsed. All the momentum in this natural gas vehicle transition stalled. Now, there's still got a lot of natural gas vehicles out there. There's still a lot of opportunity there that's kind of been overshadowed by electrification. But in 2013, it was the rage. And 2014 hit, oil prices tanked, and all of a sudden, natural gas was no longer the steal it was the year before. And that had a major impact on natural gas forecasts.
And oil prices collapsed because of the progress with shale. And it's really the only time this century, which we're now almost a quarter of the way into it, where oil prices collapsed because something terrible didn't happen. Usually you see oil prices collapse because of just something awful affected demand. And this was something that affected supply, and it just changed the equation. And as you said, natural gas was hot commodity 10 years ago. And keeping that theme, so was diesel.
Yeah, you're right. The shale boom was huge. OPEC was not reducing supply because they wanted to put the shale producers in the U.S. in a difficult position by driving prices down, thinking it would put them out of business. And the United States was dedicated on becoming energy independent, which it achieved. But then you're right. We saw a huge push we started seeing in 2010 to 2013, this push for climate mitigation. How do you reduce carbon emissions and how do you improve efficiency? You had the Obama administration come in and start putting new corporate average fuel economy requirements onto the vehicle manufacturers. And so they started looking for how do we achieve that? One of the ideas was we're going to start using diesel in our light duty vehicles because you can get so much greater efficiency with diesel than you can with gasoline. You can get a 50 mile per gallon car using a diesel engine that you could maybe get 30 on a gasoline. And so we saw this surge. Volkswagen led the charge. You had Audi doing these commercials about, hey, check out this bright white passenger vehicle being driven by a family ownership filling with diesel. And it was the rage. Volkswagen had amassed 80% market share of the passenger car diesel market. You had the Ram 1500 diesel coming in at 30 miles per gallon. You had the F-150 diesel. You had the Sierra diesel. You had the Colorado and Canyon light-duty pickup trucks being Motor Trend's Truck of the Year a couple years in a row running on diesel. Then all of a sudden, the regulators realized that the Volkswagen diesel engines had what's called a cheat device that when connected to an emissions testing equipment, changed the calibration of the engine to ensure that it met emissions controls. Once it was disconnected, those emissions controls were released and you had higher emissions than what's allowed. Once that came out, it pretty much gutted the diesel passenger vehicle. You still have diesels in the pickup truck market, but in terms of passenger vehicles in the US, they're pretty much gone. And that was huge because that was a massive compliance strategy under CAFE program for the automakers. You had GM, you and I would go to the DC Auto Show. And I remember pointing out this diesel car and that diesel car and that diesel car. You go, yeah, what about the plug-in vehicles? I don't care about the plug-in vehicles. Talk about the diesel cars, right? And then within a year, everything changed. And we're not going back to that because now the automakers had to shift. Some went hybrid, some went electric. Now the trend is electrification, and diesel is still strong in the large pickup market, but you're not seeing it in the passenger car market at all in the US. And that was a huge shift from what we expected in 2013.
Meanwhile, so we had two fuels that just didn't get the same amount of market penetration that was expected, natural gas and diesel. And then you had a powertrain that had unexpectedly strong demand, and that's Tesla, especially the Tesla 3.
Yeah, so for years, the electric vehicles were always viewed as kind of quirky, kind of not real mainstream, not real reliable, not high performance, not long range at all. You had the Volt, which was a plug-in hybrid. Then you had the Nissan Leaf, which had at the time a 90-mile range. That doesn't satisfy too many people's interest. The Model S came out, and it was a 250, 300-mile range. Beautiful vehicle. I mean, gorgeous. Five passenger vehicle, 0 to 60 in sub 4 seconds if you got the right trim. 6 figures. So it became an aspirational brand. And what Tesla did was marketing genius. So often a new brand comes to the market, whatever product it is, right? And they come in low price. Let's keep it down. Keep it to vehicles. Hyundai, Kia, Toyota, Honda. You look back to the late 70s, early 80s, these were budget-friendly cars, reliable, but cheap because they were trying to gain some market share. Tesla came and said, no, we're going big. The Roadster got people's attention. It was a Lotus Elise converted into an electric vehicle. Then the Model S came out, the family executive sedan, 6 figures, demonstrating the electric vehicles can satisfy the needs of American families. And then came along the announcement, we're going to have a moderately priced version of the Tesla for all you people who want a Tesla but can't afford it. And I'm saying Tesla, not electric vehicles, but can't afford one. We're going to have one you can afford. It's going to be $35,000, $40,000 before tax credits, and it's going to come out such date. We're taking pre-orders now, close to 500,000 pre-orders within a couple weeks. Changed everything. All of a sudden, this technological company upstart out of Fremont, California, had a market cap valuation greater than GM Ford, and it still has a market cap valuation higher than the nearest, I think, 10 automaker competitors. Changed the game. I mean, you can look at it now. You've got this Vietnamese electric vehicle company came over, and the first day of trading surpassed GM and Ford market cap in one day of trading. Now, it lost ground the next day. But that kind of enthusiasm for electric vehicles, and it made, in the aftermath of Dieselgate, the OEM seeking to comply with greenhouse gas emissions and fuel economy standards said, we need to chase this too. And they doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down. And that has, I mean, those 3 things, boom, 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 just changed the dynamics of the automakers' perspective dramatically. Then you add to it, you've got policies over in Europe and China, India, and everywhere changing the game on a global market. And we have to remember, the automakers are global. And that was never more clear to me than when President Trump took over and his EPA came in and changed the fuel economy requirements dramatically with a goal to keep affordability front and center, change the standards. And people go, John, does this mean the OEMs are going to stop making EVs, to stop making hybrids, to stop? So no, because things haven't changed in Europe. Things haven't changed in China. Things haven't changed in other countries. And they also know that 4 years, things can change. And guess what? 4 years later, flipped and went the exact opposite direction. And now we're seeing policies are so much more aggressive than even President Obama ever envisioned, that the automakers are starting to go, whoa, I don't know. This might be a little too much for us now. So it's an interesting whipsaw here, but that emergence of the Model 3 and the fan reaction, because it was a fan reaction. This aspirational brand is now tangible for me. Oh, this is great. I want one. It's only $1,000 to put in my reservation, done. And then a year and a half later, they started delivering them, and it's been a completely different game ever since.
Yeah, so the other thing that obviously affected the fuels market that no one saw coming was the pandemic. So we can spend hours and hours talking about that, but obviously huge shift in how people drove, particularly short term. And long term, we're still seeing those ramifications with, just think about it, if people decide that they're going to work from home one day a week, that's 20% off demand.
And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently, I think it said that 30% of people are telecommuting and half of them are doing it 5 days a week. That's 15 to 20% of commute miles not happening. So yeah, you think about travel patterns on fuel demand, you think about vehicle selection. Now, range anxiety for those customers is not all that critical because they're staying local most of the time. And so EVs seem to fit their model pretty well. There's one, and we can talk about the pandemic, and I don't want to talk about it too much because everybody's tired of talking about it, right? But it was a huge shift. And one of the things it did is we had a huge surge in shared vehicles. You know, I remember before the pandemic, the NACS show was in Chicago. And I did a presentation for PEI, and then we had somebody do a presentation for NACS at a super session. And it was all about electric, autonomous, shared mobility. This concept that vehicles become commoditized, and we're going to transition to ride sharing electric vehicles, and personally owned vehicles are going to become the less attractive option. Introduced the pandemic, I'm not getting in a car with anybody, no matter how many masks they're wearing, forget that. And that whole market just kind of got seized up. And there's a lot of speculation, will we get back to a shared mobility paradigm? I think in some really congested cities where parking's a premium, yes. But I don't think we're going to get back to this vision. There was Rethink X. There was a group that came out with a paper back in 2017 that just drove me nuts. The projection was within 10 years of autonomous vehicles being approved, 95% of all miles traveled in the U.S. will be from an autonomous electric shared service provider. Person-owned vehicles are gone. A former vice chairman of General Motors said within 20 years, the Congress will legislate keys out of your hand and you won't be able to drive a person-owned vehicle except on a designated driving ranch. Okay, not quite sure what they were on when they said these things, because that clearly, pandemic, not pandemic, you think people like their guns. There's no way people are going to give up their cars. So it was a big deal. The other thing that has evolved even before the pandemic, and it started with the transition to diesel, and I mentioned climate mitigation, policymakers trying to force a change. So it started, first calls I got, France and England were going to ban the sale of combustion engine vehicles by 2035. John, my gosh, this is a game changer. What do you think is going to happen? Look, they're less than 4% of the global automakers market. I really don't think I'm worried about France and the UK. They're going to have regime shifts over the next 20 years. At the time, it was 20, 25 years out. I'm not too worried. Then China came out. And then Germany. Scandinavian countries always, then Canada and California. And you start seeing these policies to ban the sale of combustion vehicles because the policymakers, they believe that fossil fuels are the cause of all climate concerns. They believe that the only way to mitigate climate is to remove all fossil from existence. And they believe that if you go all electric, you can solve the world's climate. They also know this, that is something they can remember. They can say in a stump speech. They're never going to get confused. What we're trying to say at the Institute is decarbonization is the goal. Electric vehicles are part of it, but they're not the only solution. They are not zero carbon. They're not zero emission vehicles. They are dramatically lower emission than a combustion vehicle in some markets. In some markets, they're higher emissions. And so we have to get out of this mindset that we're going to focus only on the tailpipe. We're going to focus only on what resonates with evokers. We need a life cycle assessment. And this provision in our report that talks about the evolution of the ICE ban is really, I view it as kind of a sleight of hand of the policymakers. They don't want to deal with the complexity that is necessary to mitigate the worst challenges associated with climate change. They want a near-term win, and they can point to the tailpipe and go, that's your enemy. We're getting rid of that. We won. We've solved all your problems. And it's not true. And I think, it's had a huge impact on the evolution of the transportation market. It's going to continue to have an impact. But if we want to have an impact on climate, we have to look at life cycle, well to wheel, start to finish, reduce carbon wherever we can, and don't say something zero emission when it's not, because it's misleading on the best case. It's an outright lie on the worst case. And it's just hiding the fact that to address and achieve the goals they've set up for us is going to take much more significant effort than they want to accept and they want to communicate about. So we don't talk about ICE bans that much in here other than to just change the trajectory of our forecast, which was the whole purpose of the paper. But it opens up the underlying fallacy in the market that we're being told something by the policymakers because it's easy for them to say it and it sounds good, but it's not solving the challenge. The challenge is much more complicated than that. I'm a big fan of electric vehicles. They have a huge future and they're a great opportunity. We need to build the infrastructure to support them, give them every opportunity to thrive because they have a great ability to really move us forward in the right direction. But we can't call them a silver bullet when they're not. And we need to actually look at decarbonizing the grid. We need to look at decarbonizing liquid fuels. And we have 300 million combustion vehicles in the US. They're not going away anytime soon, no matter what the policies say. They're going to be here until 2060, 2070. How do we address that? And so, getting way off the topic of this, because I got on my soapbox, and I apologize for that, but we got some serious challenges facing us, and I'm getting tired of Band-Aid solutions being heralded as the ultimate goal when they're not.
I want to go back to, you were just talking about EVs a couple minutes ago, big proponent, obviously not the only solution. You have fuel efficiencies, et cetera, e-fuels, all kinds of different things out there now. The report quotes something called Amara's Law. I think I pronounced that right. And the quote is, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And that really seems to be the big takeaway from, it's listed right there in the key takeaways, the big takeaway for what the future will look like. And it is not linear, but you can kind of take some of the tech things out there and say, this could happen, but let's not draw that line and say 30% increase every year or whatever percent, because it gets more complicated than that, because life happens in between.
Life happens. Again, I mentioned Rumsfeld before, the unknown unknowns. We don't know what the next big technological breakthrough is going to be. I am confident that we're going to see solid state batteries and EVs, which is going to change the game from range, cost, durability, recharge time. All that's going to get better, infinitely better once we change the chemistry of the batteries. So I really believe that is a major development. But, there's a lot of smart people in this world working on a lot of really innovative ideas. We have to enable that innovation. If we set policy to say this is the answer and this is the only answer we're going to accept, you kill innovation. Now, what happens when that policy, that technology you just selected doesn't pan out the way you want it to, or it's not as effective as you thought it might be, or it doesn't build as fast as you thought it might? There's a long time ahead of us in terms of what our options are. I read Bill Gates' book, How to Mitigate a Climate Disaster, I think it's called. A lot of stuff in there I disagree with, but there is a big component there that I think is we need to think about. And there's positive to this and negative to this, so take it for what it's worth. But his comment was, if our goal is zero carbon emissions by 2050, setting an interim goal at 2035 may impede our ability to hit our 2050 goal. Because some of the investments you would make to hit an interim goal in 2035 are 20, 30-year lived assets that you need to replace to get your 2050 goal, but you're not going to because you spent so much money on that interim goal. And so forest for the trees, blah, 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 whatever metaphor we want to use, it creates an intellectual discussion because it's complicated. And that's the foundation here. I believe electric vehicles have a huge future. I believe hydrogen has a huge future. I believe products like e-fuels that you mentioned, which are, if you're using a renewable electricity, a zero carbon liquid fuel alternative to gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and marine fuel. Sounds like a pretty good mix. Doesn't require any infrastructure change, doesn't require any vehicle change, going to vehicles that are 50 years old, right? There's so many things there. There are other things. We have no idea what some kid in his garage right now is doing. Is he going to be the next Elon Musk? Is he going to be the next Michael Dell? But in the transportation energy world, we have no idea. I hope so. I hope there's somebody that's going, I could sell books, but what else could I do, right? That's the type of innovation we need. We need some out-of-the-box thinking, because if we want to create a sustainable world, and I use that two terms, sustainable in terms of environmental sustainability, but two, sustainable in its real meaning, which is long-lived, durable, can last for decades or centuries, we need innovation. And I'm excited. I mean, I think we're at, hopefully I'll still be alive when some of this stuff materializes. That's, the older we get, the less confident we become in that. But I hope there's some 14-year-old genius out there tinkering in his dad's garage, messing up his dad's tools, breaking things in order to find that unbelievable answer that could really help us.
So it basically comes down to, it's really difficult to predict the future because there's so many things that could affect everything. But this report is great in just walking through how you think. And it's pretty easy for a lot of groups to say, hey, we're not going to put out a report. Things changed, and everybody knows that. It's like the weatherman or something like that. You always are able to cite something and say, well, if it weren't for that, I would have been right. This kind of sets up what took place the last 10 years and looks to the future. And it's a great document. And of course, like everything else from the Transportation Energy Institute, it's free. Go to the website, and you can download that or anything else and check out some of these good reports.
Last thing I would say to your audience is there's a lot of forecasts out there, a lot of headlines telling you it's going to be this way. Some reputable firms saying by 2050, half of all vehicles sold will be electric. Nobody knows what's going to happen. They cannot predict everything. They cannot factor in every external variable that can change the trajectory of the market. Nobody knows. Do not make strategic plans based upon studies and forecasts that don't provide you some assessment of the uncertainty that underlies those forecasts, because doing so will lead to massive mistakes.
Amen. So how can they find these reports? Where are they online?
We're at transportationenergy.org. Fuelsinstitute.org still works, but transportationenergy.org is a direct. Go to research and download anything you want. Our goal is to help raise awareness and knowledge, and that's why we do these papers the way we do them.
And that's why we do these podcasts with you. So thanks for joining us again today, John.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.